Well, thanks, Rob. Thanks for hosting us. I want to thank the First Lady for coming with us today and all the help she's done. I want to thank Senator Bradley for supporting our efforts as the Appropriations Chairman in the Senate. We delivered not only the resources we promised in this past session, but more than we had asked for. Noah, who you're going to hear from as DEP, our other legislators, Kathleen. I don't know where everybody else is in Dane Eagle. I mean, we got a lot of Collier and people. There should be more coming out, but because they were very helpful. And Eric Eichenberg, Everglades, we appreciate working with them. Captains for Clean Water, Daniel, all his guys, really good folks who really care about these communities. So we did a lot right out of the gate, had a lot of success with our program, not just the finance and the money, but also some of the policy. We have a blue-green algae task force now. They are going to report to us very soon. When is that going to be? The main is going to be September, October?
September 24th, 25th.
Right. And so we got a sense of some of the things there. So that will give us other avenues to pursue in terms of funding or legislative requests. We also did the Red Tide Task Force with FWC, and so that got funding. It hadn't got funding in a long time. We're working with Moat Marine out of Sarasota for additional solutions with Red Tide. So those are things that we've been very concerned about. But we also knew that you could have your heart in the right place, you could have the resources, but if you're not applying those resources intelligently, then it ends up being all for naught. So I created the state's first ever chief science officer who is helping us with the best approaches to be able to maintain and improve our water quality. We also have the first chief resilience officer to look at things like coastal protection, rising sea level, all these different things that, Florida communities could be affected by. One of the things we also did, Rob mentioned about, they have something with the pythons, but, we're spending money to do the Everglades, which is good, but you have these pythons, they're eating all the wildlife, and it's an invasive species, it's not native to there. So there have been efforts for removal, they've had pretty good success, but we're stepping up those efforts, and so we're going to make python removal of the Everglades a priority, and I'm looking forward to those efforts, and we will put more money in the budget. Fortunately, it's not that much money that we're talking about, but I think it can make a big impact. We also work collaboratively with the federal government on a lot of these different things. If you would ask Eric and the Everglades, what would they ask for federal government? They would say, well, if we could get $200 million a year for Everglades restoration, we would be through the moon. We got the president to commit to doing $200 million this year and next year. So that's a big deal for federal support, which hasn't always been consistent with that. But they also gave us money at the state to raise the Tamiami Trail, which will allow for better water flow in South Florida. And that's something we got $40 million for. They gave us $60 million. So that project is funded, and that will be able to proceed. And obviously, we want these things to be done as quickly as we can. So we've had a lot of those things, a lot of success. One of the things that I think, because we had success with the budget, people realize that we have limited tax dollars. People work hard for what they earn and the taxes they pay. We want to target that on things that have the most impact. And I think a lot of people in the legislature realize that what we did with water quality and environment had a big impact. They're already doing all this stuff. They're not waiting at DEP for 6 months. I mean, they're really off to the races. So we want to continue the momentum. I said I wanted about $625 million a year for 4 years. That would be $1 billion increase over where we had been, and we're going to seek that again. But the first announcement is we're not only going to seek the $625 million, but we're going to ask the legislature to make that a recurring part of the budget for the next 3 years, so that if this passes, signed into law, then people will know the commitment I made the second day in office, standing there. Will have already been met within a little bit over a year being in office. And so that is something that I think is very significant. And I think that you look at the incoming speaker after Oliva, Chris Sprouse, has been very supportive of all these efforts. So we look forward to working with the legislature on that. And then once we know that's there, I really think that the sky will be the limit for us. The other thing, though, that we're going to announce today is, you notice we have environmental laws. We have certain, things where you could be penalized or not. But we end up seeing happening is you have some of these municipalities, it's cheaper for them to pay a fine and spew all this sewage into the waterways because it's the cost of doing business. So they'd rather do that than invest in the infrastructure they need to make sure that the waterways surrounding them are safe and clean. And as a state, what a locality does generally, it's not really, my business unless it impacts the state policy or people's rights. Well, when you're spewing sewage and waste into state waters, that becomes an issue for us. And so what we are going to do for the environmental piece of it in terms of the enforcement is we're going to do a 50% increase in the amount of fines that people will face, particularly the municipalities who have had a problem with this. But what we will also seek the power to do is to allow the DEP to not only assess that increased fine, but to assess daily fines at that level until the harm has been fixed. Or mitigated. And that, I think, is important because what that then does is that changes the calculus. If you have a municipality that has not wanted to invest in the infrastructure necessary, right now it's kind of like, okay, you slap me on the wrist, I'll just pay it and move on. Well, now you're in a situation where that is gonna bite, and those if those laws aren't followed. So I think that will create better incentives for folks in Florida, but particularly for those municipal governments to make sure that they have this stuff in good working order. And at the end of the day, we want to make sure that we're doing things to be good stewards here because it is very important in terms of who we are as a state, in terms of our economy, and in terms of our quality of life. And so with that, I'm going to let Senator Bradley come up and say a few words, and then we'll hear from Noah, and then I'll take some questions.
Thank you, Governor.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you, Governor, for having me here today with the First Lady and you. And I can't help but be excited about being down here in Southwest Florida and seeing our two leaders of the House and the Senate. We have Leader Pasadomo and Leader Dana Eagle from the House of Representatives and the Florida Senate. And the Governor will be the first to say that this is a team effort. All of this happens in concert in Tallahassee. But you are the quarterback, sir. And one of the things that always frustrates all of us about elected officials sometimes is that they will go and say one thing and then do another. They'll go run for office and say, hey, I'm going to do this for the environment, I'm going to do this for transportation, and then they get into office and something else happens. Well, I'm here to report a very simple message to you today. Promise made, promise kept when it comes to Governor Ron DeSantis. He said when he got elected, when he was going around the state, talking to the people of the state of Florida, that he is going to be serious about water quality. He's going to be serious about Everglades restoration. And he told the people of the state of Florida, we're going to have record funding for Everglades restoration. We're going to have record funding for water quality. And we're going to spend those resources wisely. We're going to base it on science. This isn't going to be willy-nilly. It's going to be based on what the scientific community tells us to do. So let me give you a report card after just 9 months in office. This last legislative session, we did not, he asked for $625 million for water quality and Everglades restoration. And we said, Governor, we appreciate the suggestion and we appreciate the ideas and we trust that you're going to do good with it. Let's do $681 million just to make sure that you have all the resources that you and your team and NOAA need to be successful. And that's what we did this session. So the governor delivered on his promise and then some. And then he said, you know what? It's one thing to say, because everybody likes to throw money at a problem, right? It's one thing to say we're going to spend this amount of money, but let's do it wisely. So we have a chief science officer. We have a chief resiliency officer. We have a blue-green algae task force. We have Moat Institute. and the power and the intelligence and the resources of all our great universities coming to bear in one place to make sure that this money gets spent wisely. And folks, this money is going out the door now. I was visiting with Secretary Noah a little earlier today about some of the things they're doing already. We did $40 million for alternative water supply efforts. That money is headed out the door right now, and we're going to get a report on that very soon. What we know is this: the people of the state of Florida, our character is defined by its water, its rivers, the Everglades, that river of glass, its grass, the beaches. Water is central to who we are and what we are as a people. And the fact of the matter is, if we were to neglect those precious natural resources that God has given us, then the people of the state of Florida would be angry, and they would have a right to be. But that is not going to happen under this governor. That is not going to happen with this legislature. We didn't get here overnight, and we're not going to solve all our problems in 9 months. And what's important about what the governor is saying today is the fact that let's not just make this a one-year deal. Let's make this a long-term commitment. And so we're excited as the legislature to work with Governor DeSantis to make sure that he fulfills the promises that he made, so we can continue to say promise made, promise kept. He's pledging $2.5 billion over the course of his administration, which is a $1 billion increase over anything that's ever been spent under any administration, Democrat, Republican, whatever, because this is not a political issue. This is an issue of quality of life, as Rob said earlier. And we're going to do our part, Governor, in the legislature to make sure that your promises that you made to the people, those promises are kept. So thanks for having me here today. And I know Noah's here to talk about, I don't know if you want to say some things about Noah.
And then, get him up there.
Yeah, all right, let's do
Thanks,
it.
Senator.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
I'm Noah Valenstein. I have the great privilege of serving at the Department of Environmental Protection for the governor as the secretary. The governor's leadership and the First Lady's leadership and the legislature's commitment to the environment has been amazing this year, and it's been an honor to implement the funding and the policies that the governor's led on. I'll mention, we've heard about the investment in science. Every month we've been having the chief science officer get together with the Blue-Green Algae Task Force and have deep conversations about how we can move forward in protecting our resources and what are the scientific questions, what are the policy gaps. To us, what's even more exciting is to see the investments that have been made this session already going out, and to make sure that as we're discussing what more can we do, are we enforcing the laws we have on the books today? So as we stand right now, already we're on track to have 2,000 more inspections than we have in the prior year of permitted facilities throughout Florida to make sure that we're implementing and holding accountable permittees today. We've also had, with the transfer of law enforcement units back to the department to make sure we have sworn law enforcement, thanks to the governor. In July, the first month we had those folks on staff, we already had multiple felony charges ensuring we're protecting our environment. Those are progress forward, making sure we're implementing the laws we have on the books. We also have that same science team working to make sure that we've got the data coming in to make good decisions, and that we have a monitoring network that's robust enough and leading the country to ensure that we continue to move forward. So to have the governor announce that that funding will be dedicated and recurring means the world for us, because it means we've got another busy 3 years in front of us to make sure that we don't slow up at all, which so often can happen in government. You can have a good idea, but then have a pause as you wait for more funding. So to have that announcement is amazing. And then to see an increase in fines, as I mentioned, one of the most important things we've taken on under the governor's leadership is enforcing the laws we have on the books. As we have the Blue-Green Algae Task Force talk about new policy ideas, how can we ask for something new if we're not enforcing what we have? So to be able to have an increase in penalties and really make sure that we're doing everything each day to enforce the laws we have on the books to protect the environment is something that we are so proud of at the department. And Governor, thank you.
Thank you. Well, thank you. And I think this is kind of the first of what I think will be a number of announcements throughout the end of the summer and the fall as we lead into the legislative session, which is going to start in January. These guys are going to be starting on Monday in their committees, and so we want to make sure that we're ready to go. So we'll have a bunch of different policy stuff and agenda we'll be rolling out over the next few months. But even with environment, you're going to see more as the Blue-Green Algae Task Force reports, as we get some more traction on the pythons. There's just a whole host of things. So this is kind of step one announcement, the recurring money and the fines, but there will be more.
Governor, can you give us an example of the 50% increase? For example, who could be an offender of that?
So here's the way to think about it. So there's a municipality, let's just say somewhere in like the Tampa Bay area, and they got it. And they, instead of dealing with the water, they just take the sewage and they just dump it into Tampa Bay. So they would be fined. What would they be fined for doing that?
You'd have $10,000 a day.
Well, no. Under current law, they would be.
Under current law, yeah. So with this would allow us to have a 50% increase
Right.
on top of that, but also make sure. So often we get in an argument about whether someone will sign a consent order and actually own up and fix the problem they had. This will allow us to have fines during that time.
So you'll have that, yeah. So it'll be an increase, it'll be recurring, and I think it will cause them to say, wait a minute, why would we want to do this? We should just get the problem fixed, so we're not constantly doing it. As it stands now, I think that it was our judgment that the regime in place just didn't have enough bite to persuade people to go the other route. So that's what we want to do. We want to mitigate the damage. And look, we have an interest when these municipalities are doing things that are impacting Florida's waterways. Obviously, the state, we have an interest in helping against that. Anybody else?
Governor, if nobody asks.
Go ahead.
On another topic, the Guardian newspaper reported today that Governor Scott's administration had turned down more than $70 million in money for HIV and AIDS patients. Is that anything your administration will take a look at, especially coming up into the session?
Without question. So not only are we taking a look at it, I met personally with the director of the CDC in my office within the past couple months. They are interested in providing a lot of funding for the effort. And so what we're going to do, as soon as they figure out how much money they can give, when we can go ahead and announce it, our hope is that we'll be able to go with a really robust program that will have the potential to dramatically reduce HIV/AIDS. What'll happen if we do it right is you will actually see an increase in infection rates at first, because we'll be finding ways to bring people kind of out of the shadows who just aren't getting seen, because they know, because there's different. I don't know the science behind it, but like there's things you can take that really work. And so you'll see that more people be treated, and then we'll be able to see a big decline. So we want to do it. We just need to make sure we're lined up with the feds. They give us the green light. But if you look around Florida, we have some of the areas that have some of the highest concentration. Obviously, a place like South Florida, but then you also have pockets in St. Pete, Orlando, I think even Jacksonville. So those are areas where we obviously want to make sure that this stuff is there. There's also, talking with the CDC, a resistance for some people to want to get treatment, and obviously we want to try to break down those barriers. So yeah, my hope is that I actually hope we could do it by now, but we just haven't gotten the sign-offs from the feds. But my hope is we'll be able to announce something pretty robust by the end of the year. Thanks, guys.